why don't we go ahead and get right into this. Give me one split second here. So, first of all, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself and a little bit about your background and how you got into this particular field and what you've been doing in this field for the last, 5 or 10 years.
Great. So I would say that my interest in food and food and healing started back in the 1970s when I was just a child. So I had one of those mothers that was considered at that time to be a health nut. So she was into Adele Davis, Richard Simmons. We had homemade food almost every night. So it was something that was kind of an anomaly then. It really wasn't like it is now, where food is very trendy, especially healthy food. So I would say that initially I was kind of, I would say, polarized to that message because it wasn't cool to be healthy and it wasn't cool to eat good, healthy food. So as I got older, I went into science and I began studying more. I thought I would be a doctor, like a medical doctor. And so I was studying pre-med, but then I soon came to realize that if I really wanted to affect change, I needed to understand the root causes of why people get sick. And one of those causes is truly looking at nutrition. So I went on to graduate school. I have a master's in human nutrition. I also have a PhD in medical science. I worked with Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who is well, people call him the father of functional medicine. I worked with him for 10 years. I worked in a clinic setting for some time. I worked in the food industry. I would say that my background is that I've had a little bit of a menu of all these different experiences around food and eating. And yeah, even the definition of healthy food does vary. And at the time in the 70s, it was more about the white or dead kind of a thing. So I would say, my books, and I have 7 books, and I just came out with my latest one. It's all about colors of food. So the last book that just came out is called The Rainbow Diet. So I think that there's a lot of polarization within nutrition. A lot of people can argue what is healthy, what is not. And I would say that 20th century nutrition is all about eat this, not that. And 21st century nutrition is all about looking at the individual, looking at genetics, looking at environment, considering epigenetics, considering accessibility and tolerance of certain foods. So I would say that there's a lot more that goes into the equation now than probably did in the past. And one of the topics that I teach a lot on, especially within functional medicine, is metabolic detoxification. So the planet is becoming more toxic. The planet is filling with things like plastics and metals, and whatever the planet accumulates, our bodies accumulate. So we need to consider that in our food choices.
All right, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing about yourself. And give me one second here. Just trying to get all squared away here. So, what are some of the most common misconceptions you encounter regarding the role of diet and nutrition in managing or reversing various diseases, such as autoimmune diseases?
I think it gets back to that there's just one way to eat. I think you really have to personalize a way of eating to the individual, just like an autoimmune way of eating would look very different than when you're focused on a cardiovascular way of eating, or if you're trying to really target the brain health. But I would say that there are some underlying foundational principles, but then there can be some minor changes. And that could even be connected to food allergies. Not everybody can tolerate the same foods. So, for example, things that we might consider to be healthy, like let's just take walnuts. People can be allergic to walnuts, right? So that may not be good for everybody. And I also think we have to look at the health of the gut, because not everybody can digest foods properly. And so there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in the gut for us to tolerate foods and to kind of tone down the immune system as well.
Great. For individuals feeling overwhelmed by the vast amount of information available on diet and disease, as well as health, What are your top three most important pieces of advice for getting them started on that path for vibrant health?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. Can I have four pieces of advice?
You,
Because
you
in
can
a
have
rainbow
you can have four,
diet,
you can have seven, you can have seven.
well, I think that there are four. I talk about four in the rainbow diet. And the first one is the obvious one, to eat colors. So most people are not getting the sampling of the spectrum. They are getting mostly brown, yellow, and white foods. And, especially for breakfast, pancakes, waffles, toast, cereals, a lot of refined carbohydrates, a lot of processed foods, not a lot of color. The color tracks to nature's compounds, the phytochemicals. When I went to graduate school, we learned a lot about protein, carbohydrate, and fat, and not as much around these phytochemicals. And now we are learning that there are these compounds within plants that don't have calories, but they have activity in our cells. So each of the colors of food stands for a certain function in the body. So red foods help with inflammation and immunity. Orange foods, we want to think about protecting our skin, our brain, our reproductive health. Yellow foods connect mostly with, if we think about gut health. Green foods, the heart. If we think of blue purple foods, that's typically the brain. So there's a color code to nature's foods. So that's why number one is color. Number two is diversity. It is so important to diversify your intake of foods, diversify your life experiences, diversify just about everything. The more that we can shake things up and get out of ruts, the better our brain, heart, and gut respond. So, some of the science suggests that we need something on the order of 30 to 50 unique foods in 7 days in order to foster a healthy gut milieu and a healthy gut microbiome. So our gut, when it's working well, it likes diversity. The same things over and over again won't give us the host of different phytonutrients and other nutrients that we need in order to have a strong gut microbiome. The third principle that we need to look at is rhythm. And what I mean by rhythm is circadian rhythm. The time of day that you eat can make a huge difference. You can have a very healthy meal late into the evening, and it may not be so healthy for your sleep. So considering the timing of eating is really essential. The other thing is, from a rhythm perspective, looking at the seasonality of foods. So we know that, at least from some of the studies, preclinical studies, that if you eat foods out of season, you can be giving the body a different signal than what it really needs. Then I would say the fourth principle, I saved this one for last because it really gets into what I see is that for some people, food becomes analysis paralysis. There's so much that we have to think about when it comes to eating. And so over the years, working with people and doing workshops and retreats and one-on-one sessions and all of that, what I have learned is you have to make eating artful. It needs to be enjoyable. It has to be creative. So creativity is the fourth principle. Just you have to have a bit of fun together with the factual part of eating, because otherwise it just becomes stressful. And I have seen that happen all too often with people.
What
So
would
those are
be what would be an example of fun?
so I created a card deck because I was seeing that people needed ways to create more fun. So the card deck has many colors and different inspirational phrases about food. You put it on the dining room table, you pick a card with your meal, and you really just connect to the inspiration of the meal. It could also mean playing with your food, meaning that as children, I bet many of us were told not to play with food. I know I was. And so it was like there was this seriousness about food. So I think, especially engaging children with having fun in preparing food, like making a rainbow pizza, making a rainbow smoothie, and reflecting on all of those colors. Usually, when I'm working with people, I'll ask, "What's your favorite color?" And just about everybody has some connection to a color. They know the color that they like a lot, and then they know the color that they also don't like as much. So you can have a little bit of fun with the colors of food, with spices, with herbs, with creative combinations of foods, especially having people buy a food that they haven't had in a long time or maybe ever, and getting creative about how to prepare it. Maybe it's also, I used to teach a university course and it was called Nutrition for the Soul. And one of their assignments was to eat a meal with their hands that they wouldn't normally eat with their hands. And I remember the students would come back and I asked them, how was that experience? What did you do? And one woman in the class ate a salad with her hands. And she said it was so messy, but it enabled her to get a more of a connection to the food, and she would feel the texture of the food. Yes, it was messy, but it's like it affected her at a different level. And sometimes I think we need to get messy. There's a lot about being neat, being perfectionistic, being structured, and oftentimes the insights come within the creative chaos. So bringing a little bit of that into your kitchen, and not only the analytical, structured parts, but the fun, creative parts. So, and maybe it's even like painting your kitchen. I had a client many years ago. She had a lot of gut issues, a lot of inflammation, and she never liked to be in her kitchen making meals. And I asked her, I said, can you describe your kitchen for me? I'm just kind of curious. What does it feel like and look like? And she said, oh, it's all white. It's really sterile and it's clean. And I asked her, I said, well, what is your favorite color? And she immediately said sage green, like that deeply hued kind of a foresty green.
Mhm.
And so I said, well, what would happen if you painted your kitchen sage green? And she kind of looked at me like she didn't expect me to say that. And she came back after like 3 weeks and she was smiling. And I said, so how's it going? What's happening for you with food? And she's like, well, I have to tell you, I painted my kitchen sage green and I love it. I love to be in my kitchen now. I think she called it a sanctuary. So it was
Wow.
kind of like, for some people, I think they get totally stressed out. The kitchen is just another place of stress. It's not fun. So you have to figure out, how do you make your kitchen a sanctuary? How do you make it a place you want to be? Like my windowsill in my kitchen is filled with all kinds of little things that have meaning. Whether it's like, I have like this heart, gifts from people. I have a card from somebody, and it rotates. Like things take on different meanings at different times. And also just, Annette is saying eating with her hands. I mean, that's great. Eating with friends, eating with community, especially if you're a solo eater. When I lived in Europe many years ago, a European tradition is to invite people to dinner just like in the middle of the week. And you don't make it like a big production. You just have them over for kind of like a simple stir fry or something like that. And that also can create a lot of fun too, right? Not something that requires over the top preparation, but enables community.
Great. So, and you mentioned um, there's a kind of a pressure or societal or cultural norm of being perfect or neat with your food, which kind of brings up the topic of something Michael Pollan calls orthorexia.
Yeah,
People are
I know all
obsessed
about
with
it.
eating correctly. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
sorry. I didn't hear what you
that's
said.
very common these days, right? People want to get it right. And so orthorexia is an obsession with healthy eating to the point that it becomes almost pathological, right? It's not healthy to always be fixated on eating healthy. I have a good friend, and he would say that he would aim for 80% of his eating to be spot on, but then to have a little bit of wiggle room so that he didn't get stressed out. Like maybe have a pizza every month but you can really create kind of a more nutrient dense pizza too. It's not like you have to completely refrain from things. But for some people, if you're allergic or intolerant, you just have to find creative substitutions. But yeah, orthorexia, I would say that's actually something, because my mother was so restrictive in our eating. I did develop an eating disorder in my teenage years, which was really impactful on my psyche. And then I almost, when I went the other way and started studying nutrition, I almost had to prevent myself from getting too deeply entrenched into what you're saying, the orthorexia aspect. You displace one obsession for another. So, it has taken, and I think that's where the fun comes in. If we can make sure that we have fun, creativity, play with our food and don't get too fixated on the outcome, because food is not the only thing that impacts our health. Stress is also a huge driver of health and how we digest food.
And what do you see what happen dietarily when people are stressed?
Well, then they have typically more immune responses to food. And I've seen that over and over again. So even the foods that they were able to eat before, now they have an issue with because they're stressed out. When you're stressed, you can create leaky gut. So what that means is that if you have leaky gut, you are going to have some degree of inflammation. So having a huge bout of stress can really provoke that response in the gut, which leads to less digestion, less absorption, and less assimilation. So maybe you went through all of the work to have this healthy meal, but now you can't properly take it in and process it. So it's always really good to synchronize. And if you're feeling stressed out, there are so many things for that too. But I feel like one thing that works really well with food is breath work. Because when you're breathing, usually people that are stressed, they're not breathing properly. They're breathing very shallowly. And what do we need to actually metabolize food? We need oxygen. So then we don't get the satiety signal, right? The vagus nerve and the alignment with our gut is not optimal. So it's really important to look at stress response and food intake.
And what are other causes of leaky gut?
Toxins, as an example, goodness, any number of toxins. We have so many to be thinking about. I don't want to leave everybody with a depressing message, but because there are some things that we should be aware of course, like toxic metals, arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury, the obvious things that are circulating out there in food, air, and water. But then we also have plastics. We have microplastics to think about. This does change the health of the gut, right? And so what's the antidote to that? Because those toxins are pervasive, right? We can't avoid them. What we can do is provide fiber, different kinds of fiber. And one of my best practices about fiber is to rotate different fibers. So whether it's psyllium, flaxseed meal, chia seeds, have different fibers because each of the fibers has different properties, and some of them like certain toxins more than others. So they will bind the toxin and then take it out of the body, right? So really important to be thinking about that. So yeah, stress, if we have any kind of pathogen like a virus, a bacterium, any kind of invader can also be causing that. If we have an unhealthy gut microbiome, which is called dysbiosis, where we have more bad guys than good guys in the gut, that can just chronically lead to the production of a lot of what is called endotoxin. Endo meaning that we make it ourselves in our body. And we know that we have a lot of these microorganisms in the gut, right? So they can really change our gut health, but then also whatever they make in response to what we take in can influence our brain, can influence our overall body, because that stuff then moves into the body through the blood.
Great. And what about resistant starch? Is that the same? You kind of add in resistant starch just like you would with fiber?
Yeah. Yeah, I would add that to like the laundry list of all the different kinds of fibers to rotate in. You have, basically how I think of fiber is it's either like a mop or it's like a broom. So the moppy fiber is the kind that swells with water, right? So when you take in water with fiber, it makes like a gel and then it starts to trap things. And that's really important for healthy blood sugar response and also trapping some of these toxins. And then the broom like the insoluble fiber, like bran coatings and such. They just kind of help with the movement of the gut. So that's really important. So with resistant starch, that's nice because that acts as kind of the material for the gut microbiome to work on. Another thing that is great for the gut. So let me just go back. When I think of the gut, I think of a 3P approach: prebiotics, which we're talking about now, then the probiotics, which you can get from whether it's yogurt, kefir, or other fermented products, or even a supplemental probiotic. The third thing is polyphenols. Polyphenols are in herbs, spices, berries, cocoa. They're also in things like nuts, like walnuts and pomegranate. And these polyphenols are also broken down by the gut bacteria in order to create certain metabolites to help things like our gut-brain axis.
Thank you. And what are ways, given that we have all these toxins, you mentioned fiber and resistant starch now, what are other ways to detox our body?
Greens. Green is a great color for detoxification. So when I think of green, I think of matcha tea, I think of chlorella and spirulina. I think of just even the standard leafy greens of any variety thereof, like arugula and lettuces of different kinds, which have phytochemicals, but they also are rich in folates, vitamin K1, magnesium, which are all required in order to effectively detoxify. So that's important. So the greens are important. And Laura also has a question about, gut health. If we think about toxin load of children and that affecting school performance, definitely we can see a connection between autistic spectrum disorder, whether attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. We can start to see that the brain is affected by the toxin load. And sometimes that is even transferred through pregnancy and through birth from the mother, right? So I would say that for children's health, we need to start with the parents. We need to start further back before conception so that the mother is healthy before giving birth and before nursing, because a lot of those toxins like fats. And so they'll come out through the breast milk, they'll come out in the fatty tissue. So it's just important to be looking at those things.
And maybe I missed it as far as like toxins that we have or issues, like things that we're eating that are detrimental to the gut. What about glyphosate and other pesticides?
Absolutely. Pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, all of the things that are on things like produce or even just circulating in the environment and then make their way into animals, right? And like I just mentioned, many times they go into fat tissue. So glyphosate is part of that, but actually that's just like a little that's one of many. There are so many different pesticides to be thinking about, which is why it's really important, when at all possible, to get organically grown food, because you will minimize the toxin load of that food. The way I like to think about organic food is as health insurance. It's kind of like the small amount that you pay throughout a week for the lifetime benefit. Because when those pesticides build up, we see now that they are implicated in chronic diseases. So they may increase the risk for things like type 2 diabetes, neurodegenerative conditions. So, health is wealth. And I know that we all want health so that we can live a good quality of life. So making those choices whenever we can is really important. And if we can't afford it for some reason, I would say going to the Environmental Working Group website, which is ewg.org, and looking at the Dirty Dozen, the Clean 15, right? So that you can strategically pick. I would say just in general that whenever it comes to berries, buying organic is pretty important, because berries are hard to wash. They are typically contaminated, especially strawberries. Raspberries are too difficult to wash. They start to fall apart. So buying organic berries would be a very important one to be thinking about, just regardless, right? You can buy frozen berries. Many people ask me about, well, what's more important? Canned foods. We know that the cans are lined with different plastic liners. We know that that's not good. But frozen actually tends to fare quite well for certain foods, especially berries. So I think keeping those on hand for when we're not able to get them in season is a good thing.
And you mentioned eating seasonally. What are foods that are most detrimental to eat out of season? What are foods that are really important to eat in season?
Well, I don't know if I would use the word detrimental. I would say if we ate foods in season, it's almost like we optimize that food with our bodies, especially if we don't travel a lot. Like, let's just say that we're pretty much stationary, we're in the same area most of the year. Whatever is grown locally, we would want to be getting those foods because number one, they have less of a footprint. They're usually coming from local areas, which it can be a good thing. So I live in the Pacific Northwest. Let me just give you an example here. So here, year round, pretty much we have a lot of greens. We have a lot of berries in the late summertime. We have a lot of salmon. And so it's like, you kind of have to look at what is in your area. I don't have access to a lot of tropical fruits like mango and pineapple here. So that really probably wouldn't be best fit for my physiology living here. But if I lived in Florida, where it's much warmer, and so looking at greater consumption of things like citrus fruits, where the season for them would be longer, and many times they're grown during that time. There are some animal studies to suggest that when certain foods are eaten out of season, they may dysregulate how we metabolize fat and how we store and how we overall metabolize. But these are animal studies, these aren't human studies. And most people aren't really just eating one food out of season all the time. Maybe they have an orange in the winter occasionally, but you don't want to buy a big bag of oranges when you're living in Chicago and it's cold and it's winter time, right? Because oranges would be out of season. And when you eat foods out of season, it's like telling your body that it's a different season and it's got to do different things. So I used to work with a physician. His name was Dr. Jack Kornberg. And I remember him talking about oranges and eating oranges in the winter and how it's like telling the body to store fat that it's summer to get ready for winter,
Oh,
right? So again, I don't want to discourage eating an orange occasionally in the winter months, but again, this gets back into diversity. You want to shake up the foods that you're eating on a routine basis. Now, some of my favorites that I do want to mention would be grapes in the fall, early winter months, apples during the September, October months. Apples and grapes have certain polyphenols that would help our body to acclimate better, potentially, to the circadian shifts that come with the winter. And then cherries would be a great food for the spring, as well as, springtime, I typically think about detoxification. I think about the liver starting to clear and clean house, so to speak. So cilantro, a lot of spring greens. This is the time where we start to look at what is growing above ground versus in the ground, like the tubers and potatoes and different starches. So, this is not new, by the way. I mean, gosh, eating according to traditional medicine, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, they have long acknowledged this. It's only, I would say, in the past decades that the science is catching up, and it makes good sense. I mean, from many different aspects, from a planetary perspective, and also keeping us in sync with nature.
so for somebody who wanted to eat in rhythm and follow seasonal foods, what would be a good resource for them to check out? Do you have a good website that people can go to?
There are a number of different websites. Gosh, if you just Google, eating in season or seasonal food guide, and a number of them have where you can put in your zip code, and then you can kind of get a list depending on where you're at. It's a little bit different for people who live internationally, but that can be very easy to find online. And you know what? Here's the other thing. Talk to your grocer. I gotta say, the produce people, people that work in the produce section, typically they'll put tags on what is local or in season, or you can talk with them because that food is going to be freshest and it's going to be more nutrient dense. So ask the people in the produce section to give you the guide on that.
So now you said about, I got two things about citrus in the wintertime. One, you said about storing fat, which probably scares people. Does when eating citrus fruit, does it tell your body to store fat?
Well, there was an animal study that showed that oranges given to animals at different times where their body was mimicking either winter or summer did create a shift in metabolism. Does that happen in people? We haven't actually seen that. So I wouldn't get too nervous about it. But again, I think we need to bank on goodness, the hundreds, if not thousands of years of traditional wisdom telling us about how important it is to eat seasonally. There are just certain compounds that we need at certain times of year. Let's go back to citrus for a second. Citrus tends to be high in vitamin C. Vitamin C is a really important water-soluble antioxidant. What happens in the summer? We tend to sweat. We tend to release and excrete more vitamin C. We might be in the sun more, having more ultraviolet radiation exposure. We might need more in the way of certain antioxidants, whether it's for the skin or for different body systems. So there might actually be a reason to have that vitamin C from citrus, because citrus has a beautiful natural blend of not just the vitamin C, but also the bioflavonoids that work together with the vitamin C to have activity in the body. So many times that combination helps things like capillaries. Think of it, in the summer, you tend to be more active, greater circulation, right? So you want to support capillary health, blood vessels. So vitamin C in that way could be more important. Whereas in the winter, there isn't as much connection to the sunlight. There isn't as much movement, which can be a problem for some people, right? But in Florida, let's just take Florida again, where you have more sun throughout the year, you're more active throughout the year, you may be needing more vitamin C and these bioflavonoids as a result of those changes in your behavior. So that's kind of how I'm connecting all of the dots.
And just one last thing on the citrus. I remember as a kid, and I would imagine you might as well, that people used to send oranges from Florida to people up north as a gift during the wintertime. Why, and I believe it was for nutritional purposes. Why was that? If you
Well,
recall.
as you said, it might be for nutritional purposes. Maybe people just aren't getting enough in the way of their vitamin C, or they're stressed out. Usually during the holidays, people get stressed, right? So we look at the month of December. Usually people aren't eating very well. They're stressed. They're not sleeping to their full amount. So that maybe what the thought was there is that we're boosting and helping the body a little bit with its antioxidant status. And you know what else? Here's the other thing. Oranges. Have you ever been on an airplane and you take out an orange or a mandarin or a tangerine and you start to peel it, and it just infuses the airplane with that beautiful smell? So I think it also has an essential oil, kind of like an aroma aspect of encouraging better mood. At least that's just, not like a scientific study, but if you think about it, and the impact of citrus on, it's a pleasant smell. It's a pleasant experience to have an orange. And just the color orange is a very, orange is a warming color. It confers that sense of warmth and play. So there's a lot that goes on there. We're looking at color, smell, and then the sensory experience of something a little bit sweet and giving us antioxidants. And again, I don't want to leave everybody thinking that, oh my goodness, I should never have an orange in the winter. Again, that's not the case here. But when I see people buying like huge bags of oranges when they're not in season, and many times it doesn't even show up, but it does, because we go to grocery stores these days. In fact, I was just at Trader Joe's and I got bananas, and they were from Peru. right? I mean, you look at like how far away things are and how they're transported, and think of how less time growing, so less nutrient quality because they have to be shipped in the right amount of time so that they don't spoil. So the further away your food is from where you are, chances are you're going to have less nutrient density. Now, sometimes you just can't avoid this. Certain things just need to come from other areas, but there you go. You do your best.